All right, so I'm going to start the recording here. Everything looks good on my end. We're just going to rock and roll.
Awesome.
Holy shit, we made it.
Yeah, that's probably my fault.
No, cut that shit right out. I usually do the intro prior to, so you don't need to worry about. We're not going to, go through the pleasantries of normal conversation here. No, but Max, I am such a huge fan of the work that you do. For like the last couple of years, I've been watching what you do online, how you explain these really complex topics of sports performance and power and elasticity, and like it's so cool, like from a coaching perspective, to see this sort of information come out in a way that you can just digest it and immediately start using it. So I just had to get that out of the way before we
Oh,
begin.
I appreciate that. And not to ramble on off the bat, I'll avoid doing that initially. I think like I didn't like school growing up. Um, I didn't really care much for it because I never understood how it related to things. And I
Sure.
got a book. It was Physics for Dummies about 7 years ago, 6 years ago. And I love the way they explained it. Like they use really real life examples. And I was like, well,
Mm.
why don't we use this in science? Like I'm trying to
Right.
understand, some detailed complexity about how a muscle tendon unit works is really kind of tough if you don't understand what a muscle, a tendon, and all the surrounding stuff around it actually look like. So what's the associated imagery? And so that's where that kind of sparked from. And so if you guys want to learn Physics for Dummies is a great book. Is a really kind of intimidating topic for me, but that's kind of really cool. When I read those books, I was like, oh, this is actually, there are fun ways to teach stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I spent the last year at Elite. So I was doing some work with them and working on a lot of their stuff for social media and just content in general. So when I see somebody doing something very well, and obviously you have a massive audience and like a lot of people have subscribed to what you do and like how you teach and how you present information, that I looked at your information. I'm like, this is so it's like the smartest way to go about something is like the most simplest terms possible, right? Like being able to explain it to the broadest audience. And you are handling some very high level performance topics in ways that which like meatheads like me can literally go into the gym the next day and start utilizing. And that's really one of the reasons why I started this podcast, is because I want to take essentially the conversation that we would have in between sets of that we were training, just kind of talking about training, talking about how you apply this stuff, and kind of share it with more and more people. So you do such a great job of that. And now that I'm in the collegiate strength and conditioning world, it's even more so that I'm sharing this information with the other coaches on the team. And it's like we're already changing and modifying and adjusting and tweaking things to hit the materials such as like power development, speed development, all this stuff. So again, it's really, really cool to see that, because again, I don't have the traditional strength and conditioning background. My initial master's degree was in counseling. So I have like the people background. So the science end of things was something that I've kind of started to develop on my own over the years. So your information is very crucial for that. So again, I applaud your efforts on that. It's so cool to see. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today is the last episode, myself and another coaching buddy, Travis, were talking a lot about programming. And you do such a good job explaining how someone can program for themselves based on just understanding the goal from all sorts of directions and kind of formulating the program from the thought process that you kind of go through, right? I was listening to one of your podcasts that you had done on your own, talking about it was I think the question was, what's your favorite exercise for whatever? And I saw your brain start spiraling into, okay, there's so many angles to that question. It's not about the exercise, it's about the utilization. So what sort of direction would you go for the garage gym lifter, the meathead who's interested in becoming stronger or just more well-rounded? Because again, you have such a tremendous background in terms of sports performance that I think a lot of that information can be used for a garage gym lifter, a meathead, a strongman, a power lifter. And I would love to get your feedback on that as well.
Yeah, whenever you have to program or select an exercise or do anything, it's all problem solving, right? The nature of problem solving is universal. Whether we're trying to figure out if I have to ask the city to put a fence in my backyard, currently trying to do, or if I
Yeah,
have
that
to
sounds very personal there.
have to jump high, or if I want to figure out where to put my money or whatever it might be. It's all problem solving. And so a problem solving is all about definition. So, what are you actually trying to do? And the more you can define what you're trying to do, the better you can actually understand what resources you need to access. So if I understand, oh, a fence is very simple and maybe overly simple, but you realize, oh, I need wood for a fence. If it's over a certain height of that fence, do I need to ask city permission? And so on and so forth. And the better you can define what you're actually trying to achieve as a gym goer, the better you can actually seek out resources. And that's why people get so wildly confused in terms of programming, is because there's lots of different things you can do in the weight room that are all done in the weight room, but for many different purposes. And so if you're just a casual observer and you don't have much definition, you might stumble across a power lifter and you might hear them mention them doing some small off training. And you're like, whoa, they're doing 10 sets of 3 reps. That's interesting. And then you might stumble across German volume training where it's 10 by 10. And then, well, that's contradictory. They did 10 reps and they did 3 reps. And then you might stumble across, more hypertrophy orientated work. That would be bodybuilding, and then power based stuff, Olympic lifting, and then track based power or movement based stuff. And you get track and field. And so all of a sudden you're kind of sitting there like, what do I do? And the real question doesn't say, what should I do? It's, are you trying to do? And then from there, you can dig into the resources. A really easy example would be if you can define that you're trying to achieve maximal strength in a specific area. Well, that's the goal of your training. So you might do some volume work because you want to build cross sectional area. You might do some heavier power work because that allows you to have some crossover into maximal strength work without having, say, the accumulation of doing 20 reps on a bench press, something like a West Side barbell one might incline to do at 10 sets of 3 reps. And then you might do maximal strength training. So we have a goal and then we have said resources. And those resources, in a very simple term, would be strength qualities, you could say. So if I want to help someone jump high, their goal is to jump high. Now, we might do maximal strength training, which is a method where you lift weights, say 85% and above, because it recruits certain motor units and it's a high volitional effort. But their goal is not to be maximally strong. So that's the big difference, right? Sometimes they get obsessed with, oh, can I squat more? And then you lose definition of your goal. Well, your goal is not to be maximally strong in the squat. Your goal is to jump really high. And one of the methods you might use is maximal strength training. So underneath kind of each general definition, you have the same subset of resources you can draw from. You could say, do I want to do plyometric training or do I want to do whatever? And those are kind of the ingredients. So if you think about your goal is a pizza and you want to then figure out what kind of pizza do you want? Well, I want a Hawaiian pizza. Well, you're still going to pull from the same ingredient list, but you might add a Canadian bacon or pineapple versus the power lifter might be someone who's trying to, just eat, I guess to be very simple, 3 ingredient pizza, a sausage, mushroom, and olives. That's a good pun for powerlifters because it's 3 lifts. I pat my self on the back on that one. But they might only be executing the best, flavored those 3 ingredients. And from there, you can see how people get confused, because if you were just like, I want a pizza, and you have all these different types of pizzas and everyone's pulling from the same ingredients, well, how do you know what's best? Again, it's based on the goal and what you're trying to accomplish. So now hopefully everyone has pretty happy with the fact we've drawn a parallel between pizza eating and lifting, because I think most people would appreciate that. But that's how I would go about programming. And I know it sounds very nebulous and undefined, because you might say, well, Max, you didn't tell me any sets or reps. Or, well, that's the last thing you should do. Because once you understand maximal strength, then you can go, okay, well, who trains for maximal strength? Okay, we have power lifters. They might do certain things. And here are some methods they've utilized. And so if someone's trying to move up a weight class and they want to add more physical mass to them, maybe they need to tackle things, not just higher volume, but higher caloric consumption as well. And the inverse might be true for someone who's trying to lose weight. and maintain their maximal strength. We want to reduce maybe some of the volume or maintain what you're currently doing. You want to reduce the calorie intake and you want to maintain your maximal strength gains. So the definition is where everything's going to stem from.
Yeah, and that's a very good kind of point to kind of bring out, because a lot of the times I don't think people spend enough time really understanding what they really want. It's like this big sort of general, it's like, I just want to be stronger. And it's like, how do you want to be stronger? In what ways do you want to be stronger? What does stronger look like? What is stronger, like what is happening in your life that can add or take away from your training, right? There are all these variables that kind of fill in the gaps when it comes to a program or a training plan that, and it's funny because being now in the college setting is I'm having so many conversations with athletes that has nothing to do with training. It's like, are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you in a constant stress fest? And then there's the whole conversation that I have with the sport coaches. And it's like, are you beating the shit out of these athletes for weeks and weeks on end and expect miracles in the weight room when they're not able to recover from their training on the field, or in my case, on the water, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a whole variability that people tend to not think of, but they only want the sets and reps. They just want a quick, fast answer,
Yeah, when it comes to the methods like the sets and reps, and you look across, just basically if you do some sort of probability analysis and you say, I'm a person who I've never done weightlifting before, or, let's just say not call it weightlifting, but lifting weights. And I want to get really strong at the bench press. And you might go and interview 15 different professional powerlifters. All of them are kind of doing different programs. Now they might have a similar thread to the program, but they're not all doing the same program. And so by definition, there is no single program that works best. So there is no sets and reps that work best. It's a probability analysis of saying what might work best. And that's going to be a lot of you internalizing the inputs and said outputs that are lifting more weight. We're all very different innately. My limbs are different in length. My appetite's different. My hormone levels are different. So obviously, what's going to work for me might be slightly different than someone else. But again, that's that murky water of we don't really know, but we kind of know. It's a probability, like, there's probably a 75% chance likelihood that this might work for you, but there's an off chance that it might not. That appreciation is really important to do if we're trying to take this as a scientific process of finding the best way to lift weights for myself or your athletes. And that's where you can accumulate evidence and you read research, because evidence would be a type of evidence, at least, where you interview all 15 of those powerlifters, and they might be a commonality amongst their training. So you might say, well, it's commonly associated that they do this. These 20 best do this. And so there's a good chance that that might be really important to do. And you could do that with research, or if you look at a meta-analysis, that's essentially what a meta-analysis is. We aggregate all the research on a specific topic and we go, well, we think probably that this might be the best method. There's a lot of uncertainty in that nature, but it's really important to draw that distinction, because someone's going to go, do I do 5 sets or 4 sets? Do I do 6? I always make the joke, like, you missed that free throw because you did 5, not 6 sets. Like, that's not the case, right? Like, it's such a silly thing when you say it out loud, but when you're actually writing the program, it's something you actually debate. And so it's funny how when we get caught in the moment, we're trying to have this, you've written a program, and wow, there it is. Ha ha ha. Like the perfect program. This is the one. Yes. Like, finally. We all know that feeling, and you do the program and you're like 2 weeks in, you're like, well, I had to change half of it already.
Yeah. And I think that's a good sort of point to bring up too, is it doesn't matter who you're programming for. If you're a coach that will be in the game for a while and something that you've been doing and it's something that you want to get better at, you're always finding yourself like writing a program, like you had said, going about 2 weeks, if that, being like, oh shit, like this doesn't even work with the flow of the weight room. This doesn't work with the athletes that I have because they've just been practicing for 3 hours and now they're coming into the weight room. Now I'm not dealing with a fresh athlete. I'm dealing with somebody that's, kind of beat up, that's a little bit more fatigued. So best laid plans always kind of go out the window. And the best coaches I've talked to, it's like, yeah, you're going to crumple up that sheet and write a new one. That's just what's going to happen. Right. So now in terms of training different sorts of attributes that you want for an athlete. Say in the world of strongman, there's kind of a plethora of events that we can have. There's more maximal static strength. There's more explosive power. There's more foot speed. There's all these different variables. And one of the things that I kind of wanted to go over with you is how do you start to kind of emphasize different things going into a training block versus, for example, in a strongman world, now every event seems to have some sort of a weight over bar. So now the explosive power, the ability to transfer that force through the hips, throw the bag over the bar, is now an attribute we need to change. Before it used to just be log clean and press or axle clean and press, right? So now there's all these different variables that you can start to kind of include in your programming. How would you best start somebody with a form of power training or elasticity training to get them better? Not necessarily like the best at that one thing, but just kind of push the needle in that direction. What would you say as for a newer person getting into that?
I'm going to answer this in two parts because I think it's
Sure.
important that the world I come from, I work in a very um, niche environment where I have an athlete and they come basically live at my house for 3 months. And I have them all day and they come here and they train and we have no time constraints in terms of it. And when you work with someone on that individual level, um, in the perfect world, like we don't exist in reality. Like the athlete is just has our knowledge. I'm a resource. I'm the best Google search engine that athlete has. But the athlete can ask the right questions. They're going to get the right answers. And an example would be like an athlete once came to me to work out. And we were in the first day of training. He said, Max, what are we doing today? I said, I got no clue. He goes, well, I'm paying you to train me. And I said, what do you want to do? You came to me. You clearly have something you're trying to accomplish. And that's really important because all of our training is about helping them get better at their sport. And sometimes that doesn't mean lifting weights. Sometimes that means shooting a basketball instead of lifting weights. And that's really important to understand because maybe someone who's a strong man, if I can draw a parallel to it, would be excellent in lots of events and they can score very well. But there's one event that they struggle massively at. And if you just ran an analysis of if they got better at all the other events but that one they struggle at, would they place any higher? Well, no, probably not, because in order to become second to first, they'd have to make such a leap. But really going from ninth to third would be a massive point total difference. I don't know how point scoring is done, but I imagine that'd be something of that nature. And so they say, well, I'd actually be willing to take a third place in one of the places I get second in if I can bump that ninth to a third. And so with that analysis, then you can emphasize certain areas. And so whenever you decide a training program, you really have to understand the goal, right? The goal for us average gym goers, for myself, if I'm talking about me, it's I want to look good without a shirt on and I like playing basketball. So I want to do that as long as I can. I think having a big bench press would be kind of cool. Like I'm not playing a sport anymore, but an athlete, it's like, I want to be the best professional basketball player I possibly can. That's very different than me because I can just kind of do whatever that fills this very vague goal, but being the best basketball player in the professional level might be like, I'm going to be the best corner 3-point shooter possible. And you get paid $9 million a year to do that. So that's a very good gig to do. And so you can be the very good specialist. And so for the strongman example, the same would be in existence, right? Okay, well, if I want to get better at strongman, that means scoring higher. If I want to score higher, I need to do this. And that's where I might be lacking. Now, to actually answer the question about programming power and elasticity and things like that, aside from a sport as a more general topic, it's all everything in training has to do with a very simple, at least from an adaptive standpoint. There's a universal underlying thread to all adaptation. It's just progressive overload. We all know that. And it's just basically you need to do a little bit more relative to what you've done. And I don't think people actually appreciate what the relativeness they've done. An example is like, I don't swim. If I were to do 1/10 of Michael Phelps swimming, I would die. Like
Yeah,
I would probably die. I'd
you're
probably
right.
drown at some point. And so it really depends what you've been doing. If you're someone who's never done any hops, skips, or bounds, and you want to start introducing those, just do hops, skips, and bounds really lightly. People often associate the movement having to be maximal. Well, as we know with weightlifting, that's not the case. But when we do body weight movements, we don't associate that for some reason. We're like, oh, we have to jump as high as we can. No, you can jump 70% effort. You can jump 60% effort. You're allowed to not jump at maximal force outputs. You're allowed to not have to sprint. You can run slow. And so knowing what you've done relative, because always what you want to consider is not just, oh, am I applying enough dose to actually get progressive overload and have adaptation and eventually get better? But can I avoid any aches and pains that take away from other areas of my performance? If I get tendonitis in my knee, I'm not going to be a very good strongman anymore. If I get an ankle issue, well, I can't perform like I'd like to. And that's going to draw back from other areas. And so when it comes to introducing power and elasticity, there's a couple key areas. If you just understand the physics of general loading, it really helps. So we think about physics, we think about momentum is a really easy way to think about it, and change in momentum. So delta momentum, that little triangle you see next to the MV. Momentum, mass times velocity. And you can think about your loading in terms of momentum and whether or not it's really mass dependent or velocity dependent. For example, if I throw a baseball 100 miles, let's just do some really bastardized math. If anyone's a physicist, a physics person, they're going to yell at me.
No, yeah, don't worry. There's no physicists listening to this.
Like, let's say I throw a 100-pound baseball 1 mile an hour. All right. The momentum is going to be 100 times one. Or maybe I'll throw a 1-pound baseball 100 miles an hour. Momentum is both one. What's interesting about velocity is that changes are instantaneous upon an acted applied force. So what I mean by that, it sounds really fancy, but think of it like an egg toss. You and I are tossing an egg back and forth. We're standing 20 feet away at the 4th of July party. We're trying to win this egg toss. And I toss you the egg. If you just grab it and stop it really fast, the egg will break. So that egg has a peak force capacity of, say, 100 whatever pressure. So if you grab it at any point over 100 pressure, it'll break. So how do I stop an egg that needs 500 total pounds of pressure, 500 pressure units, with not ever applying 100 total units at any point in time? Well, I can increase the time over which that pressure is applied. So that's called impulse, force over time. And so I can apply 90 pounds of pressure, and I can apply that over, say, what did I say, 500? So 6 or 5.3 seconds, whatever the math might shake out to be. And at no point in time is the peak going to be over 100 and crack the eggshell. So that's why you can do an egg toss. And so the same thing you can think about in terms of your physics of your jumps. So I can first increase the ground contact time by allowing peak forces to never reach such a high capacity. And then I can shorten the ground contact time relative to the same fall or jump. And now I'm actually increasing the peak forces because I'm reducing the amount of time that an equal impulse has to be applied. Now, I've glossed over it, but for the math people out there, impulse dictates your momentum. So if I am a mass and I want to move a velocity, which is velocity is ever like a speed, I have to create an impulse, which is the amount of force over time relative to my own mass in order to get a certain change in velocity. A really easy example is you've probably experienced it or whatnot. If you are going to lift a weight, let's say we have 135 pounds on the bar and you lift it really slow, you're not going to have as much force being applied if you were to lift it very fast. Why? Because you have a higher velocity. All right. The movement time is done in a shorter period of time. So we have a higher force because that mass is constant, the velocity is higher, the momentum is higher, and therefore the impulse has to be higher, especially because we've now shortened the time period, because as we move something faster, the time period over which force is being applied is shortened. And so understanding really basic Newtonian physics, and I say Newtonian because the 3 laws of physics from Newton so famously wrote or discovered, or I should say, it would help you really educate how we interact with the environment, because everything we do is with physics. Right now, and you might go on social media and people might say, "Oh, physics is blah blah stupid." They're idiots. Okay, physics is what puts a thing in space. It's the reason why satellites orbit the Earth. Physics is pretty fundamental. Now you can argue quantum physics at certain levels doesn't hold up with the certain relativity stuff with Einstein. Cool, neat. I don't operate at a quantum level. I operate on a very macro level. That is our world. And so if you understand basic physics, our body has to produce physiology. I say produce physiology. It's probably a bad way to say it, but our physiology has to interact with our physics. So if I want to create certain type of physical outputs, I have to have a physiology that's capable of doing that. So if I understand certain physical outputs like peak force, average force, and things like that, You start to understand why lowering a bar really fast might stress the soft tissues a little more than lowering it under a controlled manner. Anyone who's done speed bench, you'll probably for the first time have some pec insertion tenderness. Why? Because you're really having a rapid loading quickly at a very lengthened position at the bottom of a bench press. The same reason why you might have more propensity to get aches and pains like an itis in your Achilles or your knee if you just randomly go into really high volume plyometrics. And so appreciating the physics of a movement changes the neurodynamics of the movement. So the physics that we operate in, whether I'm producing something slow and controlled, is going to be heavily dependent on the contractile structures. But our physiology actually changes a little bit when things move kind of fast because we have that good old fashioned what's called elasticity. You can think of that in terms of stored elastic energy. There's things that go involved in it. And I don't want to dive into that. But essentially, what happens, your muscle typically tends to act a little more isometrically through shorter ranges of length, and it allows the tendinous structures to have an elastic recoil. A very easy example of this is if you've ever seen someone jump off a box and do a drop jump and they jump really high. At a certain point, when the box becomes too high, they no longer jump high. Why? Because they have what's called cross bridge. You think about the muscles, these things are interacting each other like certain links, and they brace each other like we're kind of doing a tug of war to maintain our tightness. They'll actually slip. And we'll see that it's called cross bridge slippage. And that's where someone's ground contact time then becomes reduced. They have larger increases in joint angles, and we have a more traditional supramaximal eccentric because we're actually pulling those muscle fibers apart. And our body isn't going to be elastic anymore because we've lost our tautness. And so I kind of went on a little bit of a rant there, but it's all dependent on the physics you're interacting with. And the more you understand the really basic physics, you can understand this kind of operates on a spectrum of a contractile dominant movement or an elastic dominant movement. And it's not like your muscles aren't working during elastic dominant movement. It's just how they're operating in order to optimize the physics they're interacting with.
Fuck yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I know. And it's funny because I'm sitting here and I'm taking notes on everything you're saying. And I think it's so important for people to kind of start understanding the depth of this information and not just, I mean, I'm a big fan of people just trying things and just kind of doing things and just kind of experimenting a little bit. But it's also really good to understand the basic principles involved in what you're trying to do so you can have that better sort of understanding of what you're trying to accomplish, because then it starts to answer the questions going forward of like, how do I progress? How do I regress? How do I change? How do I manipulate this going forward? Right.
Yeah, and let me give you a little example. Like, remember in art class when we were like in third grade, they had the color wheel. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
the three primary colors, and you mix the certain colors, you get different colors, and you had that big wheel and had all different colors. Well, that's kind of like what physics and science does for us. You don't need to try all this crazy shit out when I can just tell you the physics, and your physiology is going to have to act a certain way in order to overcome it. So we can play on the periphery all we want and try all these thousands of different things, or you can just bother to go learn the universal threads of certain things, and then you can extrapolate out to help understand everything. So as we're in the only profession that allows you as a parallel to cut open the subject before you understand the subject, like be like equivalent to like doctors learning surgery before you actually understand anatomy and physiology. If you just understood anatomy, physiology, and physics, that is the parts you have to operate within the world of physics, you could probably get pretty darn close to understanding just about how any exercise is going to operate. What are some neurodynamic principles that the body operates on? Well, there's several, but if you understand those several, neurological aspects are what's going to fire our muscles. Our muscles are what creates force. There's some really base principles here. Muscles create force. They're the only things in our body that is going to create force. The fascia people can say fascia all they want, but fascia is not innervated by a motor unit. And trust me, cross-sectional area has about infinitesimally more science, both theoretically, applicably, and any other level of science you want in order for it to be the force-producing engine. All right, the muscle produces force. Your nerves innervate the muscles. Your brain is the conductor that organizes the firing of the muscles to have a nice symphony. That's what we call it muscle synchronization. The muscles are in harmony. They're synchronizing together. You understand how the body essentially operates. You can understand then when I apply certain type of physics to it, what's going to happen, right? You don't really need to like Like, oh, I'm going to do a study and try and determine. I almost don't want to bash a study because I love all sorts of studies. You have to understand why certain studies are a little more elementary than others. If you understand the academic system, different topic for another time. But it's important to have this. But people always go, well, that study is so silly. Okay, well, go read something that isn't you don't think is so silly because there's certain levels of scientific investigation of certain things, but they're not to go down that path. The idea is your body has only so many parts, and in order to be an adaptable body, it doesn't isolate each individual task. It'd be really, really bad at solving things if it had to operate a new individual pathway for every task. Imagine if, like, oh, this is the muscle for pitching, and this is the one for shooting, and this is the one for running, and this is the one for singing, and this is the one when I'm happy, and this is the one when I'm sad. Imagine if your brain had to work like that. Well, it doesn't. Your brain is called a complex system, and your brain has its body to operate from. And anytime you have a deviation, for example, let's say I go to reach to grab a top shelf glass of water. Well, let's say my shoulder's really sore today, so I can't really extend much. Well, I can compensate for that. So my body can create a lean. I can go up on my toes. And now it has all these different levers it can pull in order to get the task of grabbing that water. That's why your body is task dependent. It cares about a task. It's not going to sit there and go, I shall now flex my flexor digitorum, or my perineal muscle will now fire. You would never do anything. It'd be so confusing to operate in this environment. And so often we like to act and talk, and we like to observe on the periphery because it has some level of mystique and coolness, because it's never described. It's very nebulous, and it's an opportunity to leverage power. Ooh, I've done this thing. Ooh, you don't know it. But really, it's like, no, you're like, it's just this, like, really basic, here are the 9 ingredients you can pick from. You can make whatever the heck you want out of it. And it's tough because you have to go and learn those 9 ingredients and learn how they interact and operate well. And that helps you understand why certain aspects from anything, like why certain aspects what Louis Simmons preached in West Side Barbell of his power day. And he talked about how that might help with rate of force development to overcome certain aspects of the bench. Actually does have some validity in powerlifting, even though the powerlifting community, from my understanding, typically butts heads with certain schools in that area. And the same reason why one school that doesn't believe that actually is justified in not believing that. And at the same time, the other school who believes in it is justified in believing it, because, like I said in the beginning, there's a probability analysis and there's many factors that go into it. And they both are probably factors that contribute to it. But instead of thinking about it in terms of a 100% absolutist way, they are probably different weighted variables within the equation. And so by definition, both parties are technically right and at the same time technically wrong.
Well, I fucking love you, by the way. Like, you're one of my favorite people I've had on this, because I just feel your love for this subject matter, and it's like contagious. It makes me want to get more physics in my life. But one of the things that I think that you mentioned that I think is worth noting is that synchronicity, right? Synchronizing of movement, synchronizing of force, just that is pretty much describes when you see a really high level athlete move, and it just seems like everything is effortless. Everything just looks smoother. It's like we at Elite FTS, we had a couple NFL guys come out, and they were just doing plyos on the turf, and you're watching them move, and you're like, did somebody turn the gravity off over here? Like, because it's that effortless movement, and it looks like everything is just firing all at once, and it's super smooth. And not only that, but there is a certain rhythm to how they move. And it's so efficient, and it's amazing to see that I think people have a tendency of seeing that and thinking like, okay, there's no way I can be like that, so I'm not going to try to do anything, get anything better when it comes to speed or power or elasticity or anything. But it's those outliers that you see, and it's like, oh, I don't look anything like that, therefore I can't get any better. And I think that shuts a lot of people down. I know from conversations I've had, even with athletes in the weight room, there's always a couple top tier athletes on a team, and they're doing some sort of plyo, and it's like everybody just like kind of stops and looks, and they're like, how did that happen?
Yeah. So you gotta break down that really quick though, because you use the word efficiency, which is a great word to use. You gotta think about it like an engine. Um, People often see that movement and they go, "Oh, there's not much force being produced." Well, again, there is. There's actually more force being produced than the guy who's not jumping as high, even though it doesn't look like it. And so we have an efficient engine. Think about it like something that lets off a lot of steam and a lot of smoke and burns a lot of gas, but doesn't go very far. That's an inefficient engine. So per unit of fuel it burns, you only get 1 mile, versus a very efficient car gets, per unit of fuel, gets 4 miles. Same fuel, more efficiency. So that's what we talk about when we talk about force application. So like Usain Bolt and the sprinters, people for some reason on social media argue, oh, that's not the muscles, it's not the force, it's whatever. No, it is. Like physics doesn't just disappear because someone looked pretty. Like it's still there, and the physiology doesn't change neither. However, the organization of that physiology might change, and it's important to understand why that's the case. So, well, if you don't practice it and you go and do it and you're not happy with how it looks and you stop doing it, I'm surprised you ever learned English. Like, because at the first I didn't read very well when I first learned, and I still struggle with grammar, and I wasn't very good at lots of things. If we just stop because I compare myself to Shakespeare, I'm not ever going to learn how to read or write. Again, it's relative. No one's ever, and hopefully not, maybe they have, but I have, of course. I've gone in the weight room and lifted, and why am I not bigger today? More muscular. Like, okay, well, Max, congratulations. That's not how that works. It takes time and years. And so you can't just go watch Jay Cutler videos and pretend that you are now Jay Cutler. You have to take a relative step. And so a lot of times we see someone move beautifully, right? And we should think about this in terms of learning. Certain people are very skilled motor learners. Certain people are very skilled at learning astrophysics. Some people can speak many different languages. Certain people are just innately gifted to pick up qualities. An example I'll give you, and I'll get back to the initial example, is I'm not very gifted at that. I'm a very good shooter, like basketball shooting wise. I have very good depth perception. I can do that kind of stuff. When it comes to high velocity execution movements, I've never been very good at it. Like I can dunk, but it took me to be 29 until I got my first dunk in a game. Like it took a little bit of time. On the other hand, I trained AJ Green, who plays for the Milwaukee Bucks, and we practice this stuff. And the speed at which these guys pick things up makes no sense to me. So he can like watch a video and then he'll do that move on the court. And you're like, well, that's not how it worked for me. Like I don't do that. And so an example would be with him. I remember working on certain takeoffs off of 1 foot, and we do it kind of in an isolated setting. And he can jump well. And then all of a sudden we're playing in like a semi-live scrimmage, and he goes and dunks on someone off 1 foot. And I'm like, well, like the first time I like was like dunk, or not first time dunking, but first time learning a skill, I didn't just do it at like the highest level. But some of those guys can. And it's very interesting as to why. I think a lot of it has to do with the neurological aspects of perception, their ability to not like feel coordination, but their ability to trust their coordination. I think we were self-hinderers quite a bit of time. People who are highly intrinsic, internalizers, like, oh, I know how it feels, I know how to do that. We suck at that kind of stuff because we're good at like dunking when no one's around. I can throw it up and get a perfect lob and jump high and dunk it. But I struggle maybe a little bit more when it's in a game because I have to really focus on toggling that. Versus those guys are just reading and reacting. They're not like planning strategically. And so a lot of times when you get guys who are learning rhythm, I've had guys who've had to learn rhythm, teach them dance. Don't internalize it. Get a beat, have fun, make mistakes. Couple rules. We can't get mad. It sounds so corny. It really does. You can't get mad. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here paying me. If you knew how to do it already, you wouldn't be here. I can get mad at myself because I'm old and I suck. You get to play a game professionally. You get to smile. You're lucky. So we have fun and we allow for unscripted stuff. So like we're doing plyos and someone stumbles, don't go back to the first hurdle. You got to keep the conversation going. You got to keep it moving. Find a way to get through. In a game, oh, no, back up. Reset the ball screen. You're running a football route. No, I ran it wrong. Re-hike it. Redo it. No, you got to keep doing. And so no one will ever squat and like halfway through the rep be like, oh, no, I'm going to rack it. I'm done. Let me try again. You're going to get through it. And sometimes you have a squat that's a little bit off. But the more you learn, the more you realize how to not get a little bit off. Or maybe when you are a little bit off, how to still succeed. If you watch like a weightlifter catch especially the snatch, it seems to be, they'll be off balance all the time and they can still save it. They have a very robust movement pattern, a movement pattern that displays in many different imperfect environments. So you watch these guys do plyos. Yeah, it's beautiful to watch, but it's also beautiful because it's also inconsistent, yet they're having a consistent outcome. They might be like, if I jump 2 inches further than expected, I don't look pretty. These guys look the same, whether they meant to jump a foot or not a foot or whatever. And so you got to practice that. And the more you can externalize it, try and jump and touch something, put music on, dance, try different. I say dance all the time because a lot of it, people, what do I do with my shoulders? What do I do with my hands? What do I do with my hips? And you'll watch these guys run like robots, go salsa, move your hips, and watch sport. And that's why you never seen a great sporting move, wrestling, football, basketball, baseball, that was aesthetically unpleasant. You weren't like, ew, look at that home run. When Barry Bonds hit a home run, you're like, oh my God, that was awesome. Or when Odell Beckham made an amazing catch, you weren't like, oh, that looked weird. You're like, no, that's amazing looking. And so there's some common thread between even a bench press. When someone's a very technically sound bench presser or squatter, they go, whew, that's clean. There's something beautiful about a well synchronized movement that we pick up subconsciously. You could have someone who's never watched football before or basketball, and someone goes and dunks on someone, and he'll go, oh, that's kind of dope. And they don't know why it's dope, right? Or you watch someone who's a beautiful squatter, and they go, that's actually, something about that's clean, right? And that's why they love Olympic weightlifting, because it's this very violent yet beautiful movement, especially when you watch the top tier guys. So there's something aesthetic there. And so that's why I always encourage people, make mistakes, have fun, develop your own kind of brush and stroke, for lack of better words, to the canvas of movement. And don't try and robotically mimic it, but get through it and enjoy it. And because it's tough, it's awkward. Your ankles probably aren't strong enough because you probably haven't done it before. Think about this. Think about how many times you've squatted and how many more times you've squatted and how developed your quads are relative to your ankles. And so imagine then now having to use these giant engines of quads on these little, all they've ever done is be stable for your squat in the past 6 years. So we got to get these things to move and dance and groove. We got to get your torso to move and dance. And then when we start to do that, well, then it makes total sense, because people go, oh, well, powerlifters, they're so stiff. That's why I don't want to lift like a powerlifter. Well, they're stiff because they don't do anything else. like I have a lot of professional athletes who are beautiful movers who lift a lot of weight. They're not stiff because they lift weights. A lot of powerlifters are stiff, and bodybuilders are stiff because they don't dance, they don't run, they don't jump. And so that's just an observation that drives me bananas. And people say, oh, I don't lift like a powerlifter because you become stiff and tight. Well, you become stiff and tight if you don't move. Like, that's the commonality.
Oh, absolutely. And that's also another one of those, and again, this is another topic for another day, but it's the whole idea that they're almost afraid to try different styles of movement because they feel as if it'll take away from what their main goal is, what their main lifts, right? It's one of the reasons why powerlifters are like, oh, I don't do any sort of aerobic work or anything like that because, I just want to get strong. But you're right. It's one of those things where if your body has more of a toolbox of movement to be able to handle a situation, you'll have a better outcome when you're thrust in a position where you have to, like you had said, in a squat gets a little squirrely. Now your body can kind of move and adapt and adjust and make it through versus being so rigid in everything that you do, wheels fall off.
I will say, though, like, there is a difference between general and specific. And so, like, if someone just wants to be a great powerlifter, that's their only goal. They really don't need to run or jump. And they'll get really good at saving their squats and being squirrely squats by squatting more. And that's a fact. I think a lot of times we like to fantasize that, like, oh, if I do this movement, because I can do this move and my body moves great, I can now do everything great. No, like, I have athletes that move beautifully who can't squat worth shit. Like, I've seen guys who can squat really well who can't move worth shit. And so I think it's really important to, like, yes, that movement is great if you're going to move and that's your goal, to run, jump, and do this kind of stuff. But like, the general doesn't always carry over to the specific, but the specific always carries over to the general. What I mean by that, let's imagine we're trying to train cardiovascular fitness, just the grand goal of cardiovascular fitness, not localized to any specific tissue. Well, I could swim, I could bike, I could run, I could crawl, I could tumble down hills, I could whatever the hell else you want to do. All right. All of that has the opportunity to develop your general cardiovascular fitness. But of those things, will swimming make your cardiovascular fitness for basketball better? No, it won't, because now we're talking about a specific event, and a specific event has localized metabolic cardiovascular demands. Cardio, your heart, vascular being your vascular system, like capillary density, is not going to develop in your quads and your calves by swimming. It's not. You're not going to have the tissue strain. You're not going to have the potential other soft tissues developed. So we're going to have, but doing that is going to improve your cardiovascular fitness as a whole. So the specific will help the general. The general will never help the specific. And that's where we got in training all wrong. We always like to have this general training and specific. If it helps your sport, it is specific. If it doesn't, it's not general training. It's just not for your sport. Like, I think so. Times we're like, oh, this is like a general training block. Does it help your sport? No, it doesn't help my sport. Okay, then don't do it. Like, what's the point of this training block? We just like to say,
Right.
oh, Verkhoshansky said general training, so we say general training. Do you really understand what he meant? Because Anatoly Bondarchuk, the USSR throwers coach, was like, yeah, general training doesn't exist. Totally based on Medvedev. And basically, we didn't even believe in it as trainers. We just did it because the iron block system, or curtain, wherever the USSR at that time, propagated that idea because it was basically internal leveraging of like promoting him and his system. And it's really interesting if you learn about why periodization was made the way it was. It had to do with like Soviet cycles, like the actual communist cycle of something. I don't understand the geopolitics there, but that's basically where it came from. So like, it wasn't really firmly embedded in science. A lot of it was like borderline propaganda. If you read Anatoly Bondarchuk's book, he writes with a little bit of fervor in there that like, this system makes no sense. In the back of Verkhoshansky's super training, he also mentions like, yeah, our special strength training manual. Kind of like, yeah, that system, that really wasn't how it worked. And so it's interesting because we just like to take that and be the flag bearer of like general training. Why? Because someone said so sometime. Like, it sounds cool and it makes me feel important.
That's nice. Yeah.
And it's like, well, is that really a thing? Like, is general training really a thing? And there's some really, tough arguments from the guys who, quote unquote, invented the idea of general training. They really argued whether or not such a thing even existed. So for us to just propagate it so willy-nilly is always an interesting conflict. Like, you just go read the original books. They're online. You can go get them. You guys sell them. You need FTS. I bought like half my books from you guys.
Well, Max, I am going to have you on again as many times as you will let me, because I genuinely appreciate your energy, your insight, your ability to, again, you take these seemingly very highly complicated topics and really break them down into the nuts and bolts of like, this is what we're talking about. This is the thing we want to do. So again, I appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate what you put out. And for the last few minutes here, I want you to totally pimp out everything you're working on, everywhere people can find you. This is your stage. Hit them.
Awesome. Well, honestly, I should have done the beginning. Sometimes I'm that asshole who will open with it because I know people are still listening. But I'm not. I'm just giving you a hard time now. Do you guys like learning from me? Theedgeu.com. That's a website where myself and Paul Fabritz put out our presentations in more detail. If you guys like my social media, my Instagram stuff, we do courses up once a month. We have weekly presentations where throughout the week we put presentations about stuff we're learning. Again, in the same format where we take a small topic and try and break it down over a 10 to 15 minute segment. So we make it digestible versus trying to tackle the entire idea of, how to program as the general term. Let's just talk about maybe programming concentric dominant exercises or programming elasticity or certain things of that nature. That's it. And we made it a really affordable price. So that's $30 a month. I know sometimes you go buy a certification, they might run you like $600. So we try to make, what would I have liked to have had if I was someone who is a casual observer or someone who wanted to be in depth into it? And we have all the old content, so hours and hours and hours of content on there over the past 2 years that you can go dig into. If you guys are curious in my training, I have the Always an Athlete training team. That's basically the training of that is pretty simple. We want to get jacked and move athletically. Like, we do a lot of bicep curls and bench press and side delt raises, and we sprint. And I don't really train my leg like a bodybuilder at all because I don't like having sore, tired legs. So we squat heavy, we squat explosively, and we run. We don't do any of that volume stuff for legs because I don't like it. I'm not interested in having, giant sexy legs because I don't think anyone thinks my legs are going to be sexy. I'd rather have big buff arms than, giant quads, I suppose. I'd rather be able to run and jump and dunk with a cutoff on and look cool. That'd be my option. So if you guys like that kind of stuff, it's 6 days a week, easily modifiable down to 4. I'm on the message board myself. It's always an athlete through Train Heroic, which is a beautiful app. Huge fan of the app. And those are the 2 main areas you can check out right now. You guys want to check out, sometimes on TikTok, I post things, and on Instagram and whatnot. You're allowed to go check that out. And if you guys like basketball, I post my workout videos on TikTok Live sometimes. I shot 94 of 100 from the 3-point line the other day on TikTok Live, just in case people don't know that I'm probably the best shooter they've ever met. It's just a fun fact that I'm in this strength conditioning world. My basketball shoes are kind of hung up, but not totally, as I kind of shaking off some rust. And someone was running their mouth on live the other day. And I said, well, screw them. Like, here, I put it up. I walked out there dead ass cold. It's on YouTube for anyone who wants to watch it. It's dead ass cold. Like, it wasn't like starting to make. I just shot 94 of 100 from top of the key. So it's on my YouTube page. You can check out. I will absolutely pimp that out on Instagram pretty soon, because that will be just, I'll probably post it so much the algorithm will hate me as it's a big in your face.
You'll get banned, shadow banned.
Yeah, essentially. But
awesome.
That's you can check that out there if you like.
Awesome. Well, again, I truly appreciate what you do, what you put out. The information is wildly invaluable, and it's something that I look to every time you make a post. I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn something. So again, I appreciate that. And guys, I really can't thank you guys enough for posting up the episodes, sharing them out to everybody. We're growing at a tremendous fervor, which is quite nice to see. But again, I'll put all of Max's links down below. Make sure you give him a follow if you're not already. Absolute stud of a human being. 94 out of 100. I'm going to post that shit on mine. That's unbelievable. So
I texted my buddy. I said, I feel like I deserve like a commemorative pin or something, like a pendant or a hat. I feel like I should get some award should have been given to me after. It was self-rebounding, by the way, which if you're a basketball player is wildly difficult because you sit there for like 15 minutes constantly walking back. You got to walk back and forth 100 times. I've done it before with a rebounding machine. Actually, rebounding machine's not like the world's most difficult because you can kind of get in a flow and you can rattle off 60 in a row pretty easily. But especially if you've done them before, because you catch a rhythm. But walking back and forth was an absolute pain to do. But it was all because some dude commented something.
That's beautiful. I imagine as you hit that last one, it said like achievement unlocked over your head, right? Like that, you absolutely crushed it. You got. Well, but awesome. Again, thank you very much for.
Go ahead. You got it. I don't need to talk about that anymore. You're good.
No, I didn't hear what you beat.
So I beat it by 1, and that was really big. So I had my previous best was 93, and it wasn't recorded. So it was always like, was it 91 or 92? And I'm pretty sure this was 94. I didn't actually go back and watch it because I'm not going to watch me shoot for 15 minutes. I'm trusting myself. I shot 100 shots. I'm pretty sure because I was at 47. I can tell you all my misses. I missed 2 at 30. I missed 2 in the 60s. And then I went like 34 for 35 to finish it off, basically. Because I was like, I got to beat this. Like, I'm so close. Like, stay mentally locked in. Like, this empty gym at like 9 a.m. just shooting by myself in a corner. Some insane dude over here.
Oh, that's perfect. But guys, thank you very much for checking out this episode. If you like it, please make sure to follow, do all the things, and we will see you in the next one.